There's so much to say about today's gospel reading that I just don't know where to begin. We might call this Sunday What's Next Sunday, because we're now into the third week of the Easter season, and this is the last week that we're going to get any resurrection appearances. Every year we get 3 weeks of resurrection appearances, and then the tone sort of changes. Now, according to Luke, the season of Easter is supposed to last until Pentecost, 50 days after Easter, with Jesus ascending 40 days afterwards and having appearances up until that point. And so the church, that was kind of handy for organizing things from the church's point of view. So they said, okay, we'll call the Easter season 50 days long. But if you read the other Gospels, there really isn't anything about this Easter season. In fact, in the Gospel of John, it seems like it's an entirely open-ended season. In fact, that might be the whole point of today's lesson, because there isn't any time frame put on things. The appearances that we have of Jesus, I should say something else too. You heard the story about the conversion of Paul. And in the rest of the chapter that we just heard from the Gospel, there's an exchange about John, the beloved disciple. And there's a reading from John's book of Revelation. And then we have this thing about Peter, which is the heart of today's. The important thing to remember is that these three guys are the cornerstone on which the church is built to begin with. So there are communities that grow up early on as the strong communities of the Christian faith. And they are centered around exactly these three fellows. So this Sunday is the Sunday when suddenly we're talking about the future of the Christian community. We're not quite so much looking back at the events that have happened, but there is a subtle shift in today's readings which leads us to think about what's next. The Gospels, you know, have variety of appearances of the risen Christ. Mark has none of them. But all of those appearances appear to have two major components. Some of you who were here last week, which was a smaller number of people than are here this week, will remember that the important thing about the appearance last week and the encounter with Thomas is the physicality of the resurrected Christ. That the evangelists want us to be clear that this is Jesus of Nazareth, with his wounds intact, which you can touch, who has been raised from the dead, who will now share a meal with you and show you that he can eat food just like he always did. And this is Jesus of Nazareth, raised from the dead. The reason why this is so important is because if he's not raised physically, then what's the big deal? If it's just a kind of spiritual thing, then the world really isn't turned upside down. If he's raised physically from the dead, the whole world is turned upside down. It makes you go back and revisit everything that he's taught in terms of the kingdom of God coming into the world and those kinds of things with fresh eyes, because this is a way of life that he's been teaching us, which is confirmed by the fact that it has the power to upend all other life. If it's not a physical resurrection, then Jesus' teachings are just some nice teachings. They do not have that power inherent in them to turn the world upside down. But if he turned up the world upside down with a physical resurrection, then we can turn the world upside down by our relationship to this kingdom that he has brought into being. So it's the empowerment of the whole Christian gospel, of your faith and mine, is centered on this issue of the physical resurrection of Christ. That's one theme that all the evangelists want you to know. The other theme that they want you to know is that the disciples were then immediately commissioned. And they're sent out in Matthew to the ends of the earth, and in the other Gospels, to carry this message of the resurrection of Christ to the ends of the earth, so that the world may know that death has been conquered, that death is not the end, that what seems to be the limits of our lives are not the limits of our lives, that there is life that conquers death. And that's the second important part that they want to convey in these resurrection appearances. Now today, it's a little different. You remember last week we talked about how the story of Thomas really seems to end the Gospel of John. And John writes, well, that's it. He did a lot of other things too. But these are written so that you can believe. And it seems that the gospel originally ended right there. But now we have this extra chapter. And it seems to be clear that this chapter was not actually written by John. For one thing, the style is a little bit different. For another, he would not have ended the previous chapter by saying this is the end if he were going to add